Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest today is Francis Pedraza, and he is the CEO of Invisible Technologies. This is the third time I'll be interviewing Francis. Really great to have you here. Welcome.
Stewart, I need more of you in my life.
Well, here we go. So, Invisible, let's do a quick update on Invisible for our listeners. What is Invisible?
Invisible is a business process outsourcing and automation company.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means practically for most people is that, while you're working on your computer, you have a bunch of workflows, processes, projects that you can't fully automate, and you have to do yourself, or you have to hire people to do, or you have to outsource it. And with Invisible, you can jump on a Zoom call with our team and screen share and show us the work. And within 24 to 48 hours, we can build any custom, complex, or business critical workflow. And instead of billing you by the hour for our work, we bill you on a unit basis. So it's X dollars per lead, or X dollars per satellite image tagged, or X dollars per insurance claim process, whatever it is that you're giving us to do. And because we're an automation company, not just an outsourcing company, we lower the price over time. So it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper for you as we automate more and more of it. So the front end is very, very simple. It's like Nike, just do it. Invisible, just delegate. You get results. On the back end, we've built a lot of technology. We have a digital assembly line. I think of it as like the coolest factory on the internet, where we coordinate 200 workers in 16 countries around the world to industrialize knowledge work. And we have a process builder where we take your delegations that you just explain in natural language, and we turn them into step-by-step instructions for our workers. And we build a training platform, and we measure our agents on performance. And then we do the work manually at first, but then we use our agents are logging into secure Amazon workspaces in the US, and we use all the system and video data while we basically watch them while they work, and we use that data to automate. So we can use any third-party automation or software tool to speed up our processes, and then we build our own tools to speed them up further. So we often can automate 60 to 70% of a workflow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And it seems like you guys have changed the pricing since we last talked. How has that been, and how has that gone in terms of what did you learn in order to make that switch?
Excellent question. So when I started Invisible, I wanted an Iron Man suit for my personal productivity. I wanted the ultimate executive support tool and team. I was inspired by heads of state and Fortune 100 CEOs. They don't just have an executive assistant. They have a chief of staff and a whole team of people they can delegate unlimited everything to, so they can be all strategic all the time. And in contrast, the average college-educated knowledge worker spends 41% of their time doing work that non-college grads could do. So it's a giant waste of human potential. I think of it almost like, pre-industrial revolution days, where 98% of humanity was working on farms, and then we invented things like tractors. And it's probably the biggest productivity opportunity in the world today, to give the ordinary person the ability to delegate work that is not strategic, not creative, not problem solving. And so
I've got a question on that. So you have this vision in your head of essentially like unlimited productivity, and we've been promised that for a long time. But then there's the kind of normal response to that, which is we got more productivity, but we continued to do more work. Each person continued to do more work and has been more responsible. Do you think that what you're offering will actually allow people to work less? I guess it's the working less on the bullshit. That's what you're offering.
Yes. Great question. I'm going to answer your pricing question first, then answer this. Yeah. I'll try to hit both. So when we first built Invisible, it was a $10,000 a month service for CEOs only. And I thought nobody would buy at that price. We had 5 clients in the first 2 weeks and a wait list. And the problem was that they delegated so much work that we couldn't keep up with them. So we were spending $20K a month doing $10K a month of work for these clients. And we didn't have our operations platform. We didn't have our product. And so we ended up going through this crazy journey of, it was like a rocket ship for 6 months, then it crashed. Then it was like a journey through hell for over a year with one client. We relaunched with our digital assembly line, our agent network. We call our workers agents, and our processes and our unit prices. And we started offering it to any company. And we had a bunch of like tiny startups that are our initial clients that had like less than 10 people in their company. And we put the buying price really low. It was like $250 a month to sign up. So it's like we went from one extreme, 10K a month, to the other extreme, $250 a month. And what ended up working was somewhere in the middle, where the problem with startups is that they are so chaotic, and they haven't figured out their business model yet in most cases, and they don't actually have processes. And then also to deliver incredible service, you need each account to be worth a certain amount of money to justify like really white glove service on the front end. And we really wanted to deliver, like, we care about quality, so we really want to deliver like white glove experience at an affordable price. And so the right spot ended up being $2K a month as an entry price. There's just 3 subscription plans: $2K a month, $6K a quarter, and $15K a quarter. And $2K a month is an incredibly small investment for a 50+ person company that's either profitable in a traditional industry or is a growth stage startup to spend on digital operations. And it's like AWS for labor in a way. Like it's $2K a month minimum, but if one month you need to spend, $100K and the next month you only spend $2K, that's okay. We can scale. So and we've designed the whole thing around flexibility, but also giving clients control. So over the price of the unit price. So within the first 50 hours of delegating a process, we will give you a results-based price. It'll go from being a $2K a month. You get a minimum of 100 hours of work, but normally you get more than 100 hours of work, because we turn around and we say, all right, it'll cost you X dollars per insurance claim process, Mr. Insurance Company, or X dollars per satellite image tag, Mr. Solar Company, or whatever it is that you've given us. And so once you know your unit price, it's not going to go up, and you have certainty. Now, if you want your unit prices to go down, we get you to sign up for one of our quarterly plans, and you get a discount. And if you're an enterprise partner, if you're spending at least $15K a quarter, we give you continual discounts. So it goes from, say, $10 per unit to $9 per unit to $8 per unit. For every dollar that we automate, we give 50% of those gains to the client. So you get 50 cents of cost decrease, and we get 50 cents of margin gains. So our incentives are aligned. And that means that, like, you never need to worry about taking the work that you delegate to Invisible back in-house someday. And then we have an incentive to keep making it more efficient. If we just did the standard thing that most traditional outsourcing companies do, which is bill by the hour or try to lock our clients into committing to a certain number of FTEs per year, we would have the opposite. We'd have like a perverse incentive to be as inefficient as possible. Because if we could do something twice as fast, we get paid half as much.
So yeah, you're creating an incentive structure that basically motivates you guys to fulfill things at a cheaper price. The client gets it cheaper, but they also give you more work.
Bingo. Yep. Alignment of incentives.
Yeah.
So
I forgot the other question, but I think I'm onto a bigger question here. When you have a vision for Invisalign, and Invisible. You have a vision for Invisible, and so you're looking out into the future. and you see a world that exists out there in the future, and that world is not real. It's all in the imagination,
Yep.
but you're creating in your head. And I would like to ask you a pre-question, which is, do you usually, when you think, do you usually think in words or images?
Wow. I know that you're doing a lot of reading into psychology, and so it's a fascinating question. My thinking is very synesthetic is the answer. I do think I can think in words, I can think in images, but really I tend to think in like collages, like weird associations and a lot of pre-verbal associative thinking.
And so when thinking about,
I don't remember where, which classic I read this line or this thought in, but I know what it is. It was in David Foster Wallace's Good Old Neon. He makes the point that in 1 second, in a split second, you can think a book's worth of thinking. You can have these like weird neural explosions that are incredibly difficult to articulate in words, and that take a long time to unpack. And the book that you've been reading, that you were telling me about, Stewart, emotions are incredibly dense thought units. Like they are, the valence of the emotion and the intensity of it, like contain it. It means that there's a lot there to unpack. Yeah. So I don't think of emotions as irrational, but as like hyper rational.
Well, and they're so immediate too. So it's just such a visceral experience. It's stuck in the body. Like you don't really have an emotion that's not somehow experienced through the body. And then they can create just millions of thoughts. And so when you're thinking about invisible in the future,
this is one of the reasons, by the way, why AI is fake news. Because
talk about,
AIs are never going to experience these emotions. And I am happy to, debate that with anyone who thinks that they will.
Okay, well, yeah, let's talk about that, because that's really interesting. And I read this other book, and the Book of Why, and it talks about Bayesian inference and how what we've learned from trying to teach computers or teach neural networks how to think. And I can't remember the whole book, but it talks a lot about doing counterfactuals. And right now we seem to be at the time where we're kind of like in this, how do we actually teach a computer to think like, what would have happened if this had happened instead? But we're very far from teaching a neural network to feel. How can we even teach a neural network to feel?
So first of all, I'll qualify anything I'll say with the caveat that I am not an expert. And in a way, I'm proud of it. I think that experts tend to get questions like this wrong because of blind spots and they tend to be an expert in one dimension, but any really important question is multidimensional. And so they'll like assume knowledge in dimensions they don't have knowledge in. So as an amateur in many subjects, but I'm writing an essay called "The Wizard and the Wand," and I think AI is like the biggest fake news story in my lifetime, except for, well, the one, the amount of articles, the amount of conferences, the amount of discussions I've had about AI is overwhelming. And the overarching, almost official narrative is that AI is coming, AI is dangerous, and that we need socialism to protect us. And the sort of image conjured up, AI has become a euphemism that almost refers to all of technology at this point. But the specific euphemism is like Ultron in the Avengers is like this like AI genie that is going to replace humans, put humans out of work, and make us totally obsolete as a species. and might just actually kill us if it doesn't enslave us. Is going to, like, you see this in an academic form in Nick Bostrom's book Superintelligence, which is the most I think that book is proof that, like, if you're the smartest person in the room, it doesn't mean that you're right. It just means that nobody's there to tell you that you're wrong. This is incredible. It is an incredible form of self-deception, and then the way it is to then, consumed by the media and social media and like sort of intelligentsia, and then memeified and turned into this like inevitability is a great example of cultural pathology.
And so this is exactly what I was talking about before we got on the phone about, I got from this book, The Master and His Emissary, which talks about the right brain and the left brain, and how essentially we get a more holistic image of reality with the right brain, but then we get a more abstract and a more picked apart version of reality with the left brain. And and when we learn something, we go from the right brain to the left brain to the right brain, and basically go from holistic to individual, then back to holistic. And our society is incapable of making that last from the left brain to the right brain. We're all getting stuck in the words rather than what the words point to, essentially.
That's right. And because we've lost connection with the right brain, and we see the right brain as inferior as opposed to superior, we assume that because computers are better at left brain thinking, that they will inevitably inherit the earth. But no amount of improvement in left brain thinking will ever result, in my opinion, in right brain thinking. And this is the argument I try to make in the essay. And I can't necessarily make it in full form here, unless you want to take the whole rest of this interview to do that. But I will refer to the thinking of Martin Heidegger in both his book What is Called Thinking and The Question Concerning Technology. He distinguishes between different types of thinking. So I'll give you an example. AI, what should I call them? Singularians, they love talking about how AI is can now beat humans at chess, can beat humans at Go, can beat humans at StarCraft, and use these as examples of how inevitably they'll be able to beat us at everything. And I think that is a extrapolative fallacy, where there is a difference of kind or quality and between different types of strategies. So when you have a highly constrained game like chess that is sort of one-dimensional, even though it's incredibly complex, it is tractable to processing. You can literally process every single possible move and optimize and react, and you can create a cosmos for the computer's brain to go. But you've set an optimization function, and it's very constrained. But reality is n-dimensional. And so there's this concept in strategic literature of grand strategy. And there's an excellent book I've read called The Paradoxical Logic, it's The Logic of War and Peace by Edward Luttwak. And it's about the paradoxical logic of warfare. And I'll give you an example. If you created an AI I'll take AI out of it. I'll use a simple example. If you were running a logistics company, Stewart, and the goal was to get goods from point A to point B, and there were two roads, a superhighway and a treacherous dirt path through the mountains, which would you take?
Well, I mean, I think I know I think I know the answer that book would tell me to do, which is take it depends on the circumstances.
Right. So your logistics company is the first question. Your logistics company, which way do you take?
So I'll take the superhighway.
That's right. Now, suppose you're a general and you're going to attack the enemy, and the enemy is at point B, and there's two paths to get from point A to point B, the superhighway or the dirt path through the mountains. Which one do you take?
Well, that would be, if I'm attacking, then the dirt pathway.
Right. Now, suppose you were going to attack them. You attack them in year one, but in year two, you might attack them again. Which path do you take?
The superhighway.
Okay, now it's year three, and you're in the same scenario. Which path do you take?
Superhighway.
And year four?
Dirt path.
Year five?
Dirt path.
exactly. So it's the reason you're doing it is you're trying to be unpredictable,
Yeah.
which is good. And so the question he's asking in this book is, um, why is warfare different? Why does it operate by a paradoxical logic? And how can we map that paradoxical logic? And because it is paradoxical, it can't be mapped, because you have opposing wills. And when you really get into what a sovereign will is, like, and you realize that a computer cannot generate it. So you would have to have an identity. You have to have emotions. You have to have desires. You have to want things. You have to have goals. You have to have an imagination. You have to have values, to assign values, literally economic values, not just philosophical values, moral values, aesthetic values. And then beyond this, Heidegger takes it to another level of insight, which is that there's a big difference between knowledge and the accumulation of knowledge, or the execution of scientific inquiry to generate new scientific knowledge, or even logic and reason and analysis, which are all left brain activities. And the right brain activities of brainstorming, ideating, creating, imagining, envisioning.
And this is the question I have is being, because there's the difference between becoming, which is the left brain thing of I want to become this, I want to split this apart and figure that out, and then just being. And so this is a question that came up for me while you're talking there is, can we teach a computer to just be in the same way a human can just be?
That's right. Ontic versus ontological is the distinction that Heidegger would make. Ontic is the mode or direction, and ontological is moving, the being. Let's call it like processing versus thinking, or processing versus free thinking. Humans are these n-dimensional thinkers. So we can do grand strategy. We can, escape the system. There's a concept in computer science of jumping out of the system. So that ability that we have is not that we're better at processing than computers, is that we are doing a different activity entirely. And the confusion comes from the synonymization of processing and thinking.
So society is getting this whole thing wrong, and we've bought into this kind of apocalyptic dystopian vision of artificial intelligence. But humanity is like really, really bad at predicting the future. I want to give a little example of this. There's this author, Francis Fukuyama, who declared the end of history in 1998 or something like that. And somebody went on his Instagram and found a recent picture of him in a grocery store with a mask on, and he subtitled this picture, like, "Oh, I'm robbing the store," like, and it's total dystopian. And it's so funny to just see that like that's what we're doing all the time. We're all wrong about everything, and then we put weight and emotional valence into this future that is constantly changing, and there's no way to predict it in any meaningful sense. I mean, we can get trends, and we're talking about like general things that are going to happen in the future, and we can kind of play around in that area, but all of it, like, it's not accurate. It's not what reality is going to happen.
Yep. Amen. And AIs are really incredible at dealing with chaotic systems. And actually they make the systems more chaotic, because the more AIs you create, the more AIs you need to create, because they're all sort of reacting to each other with their different optimization functions in real time. But they fundamentally need a thinker to provide direction and meaning and a goal. And so in other words, I use the metaphor of the wizard and the wand. And so the fallacy is that the wand is somehow going to replace the wizard. That in the future there will be wands and no wizards. But actually, what's likely to occur is that the wand will just always make the wizard more powerful. And maybe if there is a singularity event, the singularity to expect is one in which the wand becomes part of the wizard. So, in this, it is slightly different than.
It already is. I mean, the wand is already part of the wizard. So, and I'll
right,
give it.
So I would like to argue that there will be no singularity, but the one thing that does seem qualitative in the shift is that, yes, a man from 1900 with his, with all the technology of 1900, his steam engine and his machine gun and his printing press and all these things can it appears to be a wizard to the man of 1100. However, and in the same way, a man from 2020 appears to be a wizard to a man from 1900 with our iPhones. Our iPhone, but if you remove the man from 1900, if you put him on an island, if you remove him from society and his tools, then he loses those wizarding powers. He becomes just like the guy from 1100. In the same way, if you remove us from our iPhone or from our devices and our internet and our society, if you put us in an island, we also just become like the man from 1100.
Well,
What might occur in the future that is qualitatively different is that the technology, the connection to society and the connection to our tools and to the networks that we've constructed might literally, like the iPhone might be inside of you. It's like you swallow the iPhone and iPhone's in your brain. And however, I think the important question, which other than the question of whether this is possible, other than the feasibility question, the next question that it begs is, what does this do to individuality? And that, in my mind, is the central question that we need to get right. And it is very clear to me that individuality is under attack, but that it will never, as long as civilization exists at all, individuality will and must always exist, and it will always come out, because to destroy it eliminates the wizard function. So the closest you can get to destroying individuality is building a collectivist society in which there is only essentially one individual: the sovereign, the king, the Mao, the Stalin, the Hitler. Because you're submitting or subjecting all sovereign wills, all the individuals, to one sovereign will.
And this is because that's like there's been a lot of science fiction books recently about that combine a lot of what people understand from meditation, their meditation practice, and then create a world where, because already my sense of individuality is not necessarily an accurate representation of what's going on. My sense of individuality is an illusion that my brain has created but in reality, after I die, everything that is a part of me will then enter everything else. And it's like, and people talk about with enlightenment experiences that whole sense of individuality goes away. And then what these science fiction books have brought in is essentially that a world where technology does that as well. But
yes, exactly, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
I think we've created, again, another pathology through this assumption that because when we're on psychedelics, our ego disappears, that enlightenment always means the destruction of individuality and the ascension to a collective consciousness. And there is a reason why in your ordinary waking state, it is incredibly disadvantageous for you to not have an ego.
And to think well, and this goes back to the right brain thing, because if you stimulate somebody's right brain, you will have them have a lack of sense, a sense of self. They'll be put into a bliss. And it is really difficult to operate in a society when you're in bliss, because you're all of a sudden, all of your needs to go out the window. At that moment, you don't need food. You don't want anything else besides that bliss experience. And then it's really hard to operate in our society that way. But maybe that, like if you're wrong about AI, and that AI does take all the jobs, and that 99% of the people are just kind of hanging out, maybe they want to be in that bliss state all the time.
Good question. I'm gonna write that down. Remind me to talk about The Grand Inquisitor by Dostoevsky. But I'm gonna go a different direction first. So I don't want to make this into a simple binary of like, you know, the left thinks it's the collective and the right thinks it's the individual. And it's like, either it's going to be pure individualism or pure socialism. No, I actually think that like the truth tends to be paradoxical, and getting the paradox right is not as simple as like a little bit of both. It's like, oh, a little bit of individual and a little bit of society. No, that's like, you know, failing paradox school. So the paradox we actually observe in society when it's working is that the individual gets to be the individual, but the individual gains from trading in a society where there are many individuals. The more individualistic everyone is in society, the better it is to be in that society, because the more gains there are from trade. If everyone is as unique as they can be, then they're providing something that you can't get out anywhere else. And so you have this incredible correlation as opposed to opposition between the advantages of society and the advantages of the individual when you have a free society. But when you have an unfree society, you have the opposite correlation, where you end up having just one individual in an unfree society, and that individual is the sovereign, the Hitler, the Mao, the Stalin. And all other individualism is suppressed, and you lose most of the advantages of society. So actually, if our iPhones ended up becoming a part of us, and the internet was like an extension of our brain, this would all just be made much more intense, where the advantage of being part of such a network would be retaining your individualism and actually accentuating, extending, becoming more and more unique, but while staying networked. And a good way to think of this is debate. So I think the bet on democracy is not a bet on like stand up and be counted, one man, one vote. I think that's very minor. I think the bet on democracy is that there are gains to trade from dialogue, that both sides start off a debate being wrong and they end up being less wrong. And in the process, they don't need to agree with each other at all. They don't need to come closer to each other in opinion for it to be a profitable debate.
And which has gone out the window in the last 3 months, because
Yes.
now we're in an emergency state, and this emergency state is probably not going away. Now the inertia of our bureaucratic system is now bound into keeping what we've just established in the last months in place. And then we have individuals who are yelling at other people to not do certain things because their vision is that whatever that person is doing is not good for the herd. So essentially it's like all that we are now not allowed to disagree. Nobody's allowed to disagree.
Yes. And so I think one of the most important debates is abandoning utopia for entopia. And utopia is the idea that like there is one future that we all should desire, and here's how it works. Here are the rules. You know, we're gonna force this to happen and force that to happen and force this to happen. And if we force all these things to happen, we're gonna end up in this perfect society. Isn't it great? Follow along with us. And there are these like attempts to like persuade everyone that my utopia is better. Give me the power of the state. Give me the power of coercion. Give me the guns so that I can force everyone to do this and get to utopia. And how dare you get in the way of utopia?
You want utopia?
You must be a murderer if you aren't supporting me. And as a matter of fact, that gives me the justification to like murder you because you're going to prevent progress.
You don't want utopia.
Right? Yeah, that's like fascist. Utopian thinking can't really get away from its underlying fascistic tendency. The alternative to utopia is entopia, and entopia is any system in which anyone is free to pursue the life that they desire and to freely and non-coercively persuade other people to do activities with them. And it results in the greatest number of possibilities. and the basic rule in Entopia is nonviolence. It's like, I can't force you to do things, but I can go do whatever I want within that system. And so going back to this question around like what happens when the wizard absorbs the wand, and the wand keeps getting more and more powerful, and the wizard keeps getting more and more powerful, and the wizards end up being more and more networked to each other, is that you have this great war of like any wizard who wants utopia, there's always the risk that they use the wand to force the other wizards. And I don't actually think that there is a stable solution to it. Like, I actually think that there's always the possibility of World War III, where our increasingly powerful technologies are weaponized and used to coerce and destroy each other. But there's not the inevitability of it, which is an important distinction. I actually don't think there is some, like, Americans love the Constitution. I love the Constitution. But the fallacy of the Constitution is that it can become a mechanistic savior. It's like, because we have this mechanism, therefore there will be no problems. It's like, no, it's to quote Franklin, it's a republic, madam, if you can keep it. There's no, to deify the Constitution is similar to deifying AI. It's saying this wand shall save us. But no, like, it really ultimately comes down to the competing sovereign wills of the wizards, and what type of world that they will create through debate, through striving, through this weird combination of cooperation and conflict that exists in a society.
What do you think about, have you seen this kind of recent trend? The hippies have been doing it a long time, but now the technologists in San Francisco, the younger ones who are also hippies, are starting to set up eco villages, and COVID-19 has basically spurred that on like crazy. And so now I'm starting to see them pop up. There's one just 2 hours north of me. And so what they seem to believe is you establish a small community of less than 150 people, and that becomes the super individual. And what do you think about this idea of an individual within a small community? And can the small community become an individual?
So I think the philosopher Thomas Hobbes is misunderstood and misinterpreted. And I'll even go. I'll even have a further presumption, and I'll say that Hobbes didn't understand himself.
Who does? Who does
exactly.
understand themselves?
So this idea of a meta individual is in Hobbes. So the idea that society is a sort of leviathan, a meta individual that emerges from all the individuals. And the British invented the corporation, and it's one of the most important inventions we have. And so there's simplified society, 3 layers. There's the individual, the corporations, and the state. The individual, the Medicis, and the Leviathan. Now you can make it more complex. You could say, well, there's like individuals, then families, then neighborhoods, then cities, then counties, then states, then and companies, and then states, and then there's super states. Like whatever. You can just make it really complicated. But I think those 3, individual, corporation, and state, are a good trichotomy. And it is definitely true that a corporate identity can exist, or a communal identity can exist. That it's this emergent phenomena that comes, kind of emergent intelligence that comes through a dense network. As the Metcalfe's law, as you add the number of people in a society, the number of potential connections between them increases exponentially. But I think there's a weird paradoxical logic though that exists with corporations. And so let's think of several group sizes. A group of 3, a group of 9, a group of 50, a group of 5,000 and a group of 500 million. Okay. Group of three, you know, well, group of two, it's like we know how difficult relationships are. You never actually, like, you can even have a thriving relationship to, you know, it's funny, there's all these contradictions in popular society. So, you know, it is certainly politically correct to say that in a healthy relationship, neither side tries to control each other, and both sides let each other fully express themselves, and they achieve harmony. But you know, that same person is also, it's also politically correct to say, like, we should all unite behind one cause as a society. It's like, wait, what? You know, it's such a basic error. You know, it's so hard to get a relationship of two right. Just think about a relationship of three. But yet it is possible to align three people around a common identity and in a common direction. And you can actually develop a hive mind that's pretty impressive, where over time, three people can so deeply know each other that they can almost guess what each other would say in most situations. Think about 9, like the size of the Fellowship of the Ring. You start to get you know, weird tensions, and there's a lot of tension. It's just, you can't. It's hard to build cohesion, but you can still create a common cause. We're going to go take the ring to Mordor. You get up to a larger society of like 50, and my goodness, you know, it's like you need these like complicated mechanisms to facilitate debate and voting, and you're never really going to agree, but like it gets looser and looser. You get to a society of like 500 million. My goodness, you know, you actually can't agree on anything, and yet there may be a huge benefit to such a society existing. So the way you get the best of both worlds is you set up whatever rules you need to exist to preserve Antopia and to allow the disagreements and the agreements to become fractal. So within 500 million, there can be n number of groups that all agree or disagree on any number of things. And they can compete or collaborate in any number of ways as long as they don't kill each other. And that is the way that is the only thing that you can get a 500 million person society to agree on as a basic social contract.
But then, so I mean, then there's complexity in how to actually establish the overarching society that adopts the Entopia, the rules that are necessary to make Entopia work. And then there's another thing I wanted to talk about. Oh yeah, it's the global internet culture. And kind of, you know, that we have a representative of here. Your company itself is kind of leveraging the global internet culture in order to establish like a workforce that's pan-global, and then you know, what some people kind of see, a lot of the singularity people see, is that there's essentially a global internet nation that we're going to have. You know, the United Nations is just this first version of it, and eventually, like, it's like the global internet culture, you know, that old people can't really take a part of because they can't really get their minds into this thing. But young people are like immediate, you know, like 12-year-old is playing games on Twitch with people from Indonesia. And so all that stuff, it seems like if that's going to happen, that is where you can build the rules for Entopias for that global internet culture.
I'd say, bro, have you seen the internet? It is chaotic as fuck. You know, there's all kinds of disagreement. I won't deny, it's paradoxical. I won't deny that on the one hand, globalization is occurring, and so there is more of a global dialogue. But the idea that you can get billions of people to agree on any meaningful proposition or vote, you know, just imagine a true global democracy where everyone had the ability to digitally vote on any proposition in real time, and how quickly that society would destroy itself.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the question of rules. So again, Entopia is not a utopia. So I don't believe Entopia is like guaranteed.
Got to be organic.
There's no guaranteed stability in Entopia.
Yeah.
In other words, I don't believe that it's sort of somehow like final, there's no happily ever after, where it's like, now that we have this structure, there will never be any risk of civilizational collapse ever again. Nope. I am anti-utopian in that sense. So therefore meaning becomes deferred. The notion of progress is a quite tricky one. It's not actually clear that we've made progress, even though it seems like we have. So if you take the Steven Pinker view that things have never been better, Peter Diamandis, who I enjoy, is a friend of mine, an old friend, has this kind of view of like things are getting better and there's optimism, there's progress. In the 20th century, which is the most progressive century of all past centuries, 130 million people died from communism and fascism. It was a giant bloodbath. And the 21st century seems relatively peaceful so far, but we've had many people die, Syria, etc., Iraq. There have been many wars, many small wars that most people aren't even really aware of. And yet, yeah, you could look so far in the story, you could see that, wow, there's fewer people in poverty, there's more wealth, but look, boom, now coronavirus, and there's probably going to be hundreds of millions of people starving. So what happens if coronavirus turns into World War III and 1 billion people die? Are we still making progress? In other words, meaning is deferred. It's like, it seems like you're making progress in moment at, t = 1, but at t = 2, you realize, fuck, we're not making progress. Like, we seem to be way worse off than we were at t = 0. And
this is happening all the time with people's cherry picking of statistics as well for coronavirus. Because like anytime that you pick, yes, you like zero in on one data point or like many data points, but it's still dependent on the frame that you're looking at the data with. So it's like there's so many fucking variables about living in a human life. Like there's,
yes,
it's mind-boggling, and we can't, like, no matter how good your argument is, it's never going to fully encapsulate reality.
Yes. So I've written 6 coronavirus essays so far. One of them was a little temporary safety, quoting Benjamin Franklin: anyone who would trade liberty for safety deserves neither. The argument I make is against technocracy and the utilitarian conceit of technocracy, and sort of uncovering it for the sham that it is, that it actually ends up turning into pragmatic populist politics. And I say populist not as a flair for the right, but of both the left and the right, and just actually all politicians, just inherent in politics. The conceit of utilitarianism is that you can create utopia if you just try to maximize the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and you put experts in charge, and that you can sort of accumulate best practices, and that the experts will tell us what to do in order to solve any problem. And this is very similar inherently to the conceit of AI, which is that somehow if you have enough processing power, these things will just take over, be better at everything, run society, run the world, put us out of business, and create, in the socialist, the socialist argument is, well, actually, the general AI argument is socialist, is that, the only hope is that we, sort of use AI as our sort of digital slave to create abundance for us so that we can all have universal basic income and retire and do no productive work. Aside from the fact that it's just wrong, and not desirable, it's also wrong. Like it doesn't actually work. It's not true. So think about it. Think about a couple stories. So suppose I'm 80 years old. I'm an old geezer, and I'm highly at risk from coronavirus, and I want to see my family, and I don't want to be locked up, and I decide to leave my house. What are you going to do? Shoot me? Put me in jail? Tell me I can't? Is that really the society we want to live in?
It's a scary one. So there's a thought. It was so good. Oh, I've lost it. Damn it. Um, so you talk a lot about liberty, and you wrote this great thread about liberty from one of the philosophers. It was really great, and you also have experience with meditation. I'm wondering what your experience is of liberty in the traditional sense, the of Western philosophy, how that matches up with this kind of unconditional freedom or unconditional liberty that you find in meditation once the sense of self is essentially dissolved, or uh, or nirvana, or these types of like absolute liberty from conditions, because there is a part of our being that is untouched or unstruck by conditions. What do you
Yeah.
think about these two ideas of liberty? And then also, I guess it gets into this traditional understanding of enlightenment, and like, why did both of those things get coined the Enlightenment? Why did the Age of Reason get coined the Enlightenment, and why did Nirvana get coined as enlightenment?
So enlightenment is highly politicized. Just like utopia, it's like, unavoidable that such a
Woke.
term would be politicized.
Yeah.
It's just as politicized as good and evil, as beautiful and ugly, as anything else. So the idea that there's traditional enlightenment is like highly suspect. Which is not, I'm not so cynical to suggest that there's no such thing. There might actually be many enlightenments. I think that there's a book I haven't read, but it's like, after the ecstasy, the laundry, or something like that. It's just like, you can have an enlightenment, but then you wake up the next day and you go on with your life, and there's this sort of, you end up, there's no final enlightenment. So after you have an enlightenment, what do you need? You need another enlightenment. This idea that there's only like one enlightenment in your life is very similar to the idea that there's like one utopia and that it's a final happily ever after type of outcome. It's a total fucking fallacy. We need to get over it. I think it's a much more exciting world, given that there's an inherent instability and an unknown outcome. In other words, we live in a non-deterministic world, thank God. So doom, either way, positive doom or negative doom, is not preventable, or guaranteeable, or inevitable. You can't prevent your death. You can't prevent the death of civilization in any final way. But it's not inevitable. So you can do something about it. And time is long. Time is super long. And so this story just sort of, you're in a story that is morphing and morphing in all these different ways. And so going back to the questioning of progress, I can't go back in time to see the Norman landing in 1066. I can't go back to the British Raj. I can't go back to Tsarist Russia. I can't go back to meet Confucius. I can't go back to hang out with samurai. Have we made progress in the sense that there are whole modes of being, whole beautiful civilizations that we've lost to time? And it's not like, I think the anti-imperialism argument is such bullshit, frankly, because it misses the point. It's like, yes, European civilizations destroyed the Incas or the Aztecs, and it's like a very simple two-sided debate of like, well, they were cutting out people's hearts and we were more civilized. It was like, no, you weren't civilized. You're just as evil. Who cares, guys? It's like, zoom out a little bit more and you realize that like civilizations die anyways. It's like we've already, how many civilizations have come and gone, and we can't get them back. So it's like, yeah, we have modern plumbing, and we have the internet, and we have TikTok. Congratulations, progress. Yeah. But like, wouldn't it have been cool to like hang out with Achilles? And how much is that worth? Put a price on that. You can't, because prices are the most philosophical thing that exist. Every price has Francis coin attached to it, or Stewart coin attached to it. And the reason trade is even possible is because something is worth more in Francis coin than it is in US dollars, or something is worth less in Francis coin that isn't US dollars. So I buy or I sell. And so if all I valued was um, buying a mountain in the Rockies, dynamiting the shit out of it, and turning it into a modern 21st century Mines of Moria, and I was a billionaire, then that would be the only legitimate use of my capital. That'd be the only thing I would want to use my money on. I wouldn't like value buying a cruise liner ticket just because I could. It just has zero value to me in Francis coin. So I just don't spend my dollars that way. So I think people forget about this, and the technocratic conceit and the AI conceit is something that was, I think, well described by Hayek in his phrase, the fatal conceit. The idea that like, if you have enough processing power, you can central plan everything through some like communist AI and give people, you know, universal basic income and correct for all the injustices and just like create a utopia. And it actually always ends up being a freaking disaster. So again, going back to the question of rules, the core rule in an entopia is no violence. And the only way to create no violence is to have the state have a monopoly on violence and have the state itself be bound by a constitution of some kind, and have checks and balances so that the state itself can't become violent and oppressive.
So I got a question. Does that need to be geographic or in physical space? Can that be virtual?
It does need to be in physical space because nonviolent conflict doesn't ultimately prevent liberty. So, you know, quote unquote hate speech doesn't prevent me from saying the next thing. You know, you can say whatever you want. I can say whatever I want. It doesn't mean you can't damage me, but it's not physical violence. Physical violence refers to theft, as well as like bodily harm. But that's the limit of it. And here's the thing here's the point I want to make. And this is the neo-Hobbesian point, that is an unstable system. That, in other words, the Constitution attempted to create a society like this, but it's not a mechanistic guarantee. Mm-hmm. There is no wand that can usher in entopia forever. Entopia ultimately, and this is the Hobbesian point, that you can try to chain Leviathan with this Montesquieu idea of separation of powers, checks and balances, a constitution, popular sovereignty, the Second Amendment. Everyone has guns. If things get really bad, you know, we can all have an armed revolution. And it's just actually the Second Amendment actually contains the whole point. Because what makes society great is individualism, is the sovereignty of the individual. The fact that an individual can be unique, that you can be Beethoven and I can be Van Gogh and our neighbor could be what's the famous chef? Julia Childs, whatever. Like that you can have a society of all these incredible individuals who have their own ideas, their own desires, their own willpower, that you always have this built-in instability that like, there's nobody who can guard the guardians, right? So it's like, well, if the state is going to have all the guns and protect us from each other, who protects against the state? Well, we'll have the Supreme Court, but then suppose you have whoever runs the military just conquers the Supreme Court. Well, we're going to have this and that, and you end up trying to build all these like weird checks and balances, and you can kind of get it right, but the point is that it's unstable. That like at any point in time, it could all fall apart. And that this isn't a bad thing, that you can't actually fix this. Fixing this would be similar to, oops, does this sound familiar? It'd be similar to trying to prevent death. Okay, all right, guys, let's get to zero risk of civilization falling apart. Let's get to zero risk of death. It's the same thing. So zero risk of death is like, all right, the speed limit shall be 5 miles per hour. All right. Everyone must eat this exact healthy diet that the experts have said. Like, all right, it's like you get into these, and it's like, no, it's not possible. It's all over optimization. If you want,
and that's it. That's it's the each individual's fear of death, and it's like unlooked at fear of death. They can't even like broach that even general subject without thinking themselves morbid, of like death. That's gonna happen. It's gonna get you. and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's just like the unwillingness to even look at that, and that feeds all of our issues in a society of like, nobody wants to die. So it's like, but there is no escape from it.
No escape. And I think I'm going to get really religious about it and go back to your question around meditation. I'll do an Eastern and a Western take on it. It is true that in meditation, and I say meditation, by the way, is not in some way monopolized by the East. There's definitely been meditative traditions within Christianity, as well as in really most traditions that I'm aware of. But society may be bigger than the individual on the outside, but the individual is bigger than society on the inside. And meditation is a way of connecting with that. We contain worlds. And this is something that, the wand doesn't have, but the wizard has. The wizard has the ability, like, where do ideas come from? That's an old question from Plato. It's a fucking mystery. The idea, the post-Cartesian idea, like after Descartes, there's this idea that somehow everything was a chemical interaction occurring in your head that we can reduce to science. And that also, Wissenschaft denken nicht. Science does not think. You can't fully reduce reality. And there's something going on that is beyond the material. The spiritual is not some sort of like woo-woo bullshit. There's a real connection to something beyond the material world. And the proof of it is that you see this constant invasion from these things called ideas beyond the material world that are invading our time. So think about the miracle that occurs when an architect looks at a river separating two bodies of land, Manhattan and Brooklyn, and takes a piece of paper, which is its own miracle in and of itself, and some charcoal, which is its own miracle in and of itself, and draws a bridge, and then fast forward, and you're walking across that bridge in real material world. Like something entered the material world. Where the fuck did it come from?
And that is, and so many rationalists, people who are in love with their own rationality and think that all of those questions that we used to ask about the supernatural, and even that term supernatural, it's like defines it as something outside of the natural world. Like it's all about to return to biblical proportions. Like there's no way that fundamental human drive to connect with God essentially is going away, and like it's going to come back like on a huge level.
Yeah, and so we realize that we're mortals. And by the way, this is another conceit of the sort of progress crowd, the singularians, is that we can somehow become immortal. And I think that life extension is certainly possible, but it doesn't change the underlying predicament of mortality, which is that amortal and immortal are different. So even if we extend our lives, we can still die. And even if you get really sci-fi and you can like reconstruct consciousness in a new body, there still doesn't change the fact that like the universe is fucking huge, and so much bigger than us, and time is so much bigger than us, and there are things that are way beyond our control, and will be. And again, the conceit extends indefinitely to like, well, if we just had powerful enough wands, we would be as gods. But and this is where the ego absolution of the East is actually a good thing, where it's like the East and the West, like what good is it to store up treasures on earth where moth and dust destroy, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. That's Paul. But in the West, it's the idea that suffering begins with this hyper attachment to your identity, but you're going to die. So if you want to relieve yourself from suffering, detach. And I think that, in a previous podcast, we discussed this sort of level 1, level 2, level 3 Buddhism. Level 1 Buddhism, you realize you're suffering and that the path is not desiring. Level 2 Buddhism, you detach from the world, you go to the top of the mountain, then you realize you're desiring not to desire, and that, and by the way, even if you can do that and pull off that backflip and fully detach, it's a sort of like nihilistic suicide that ultimately, if you choose not to commit suicide, you come back down from the mountain, level 3 Buddhism, and you try to operate as an agent in the world. Maybe I'm a heretic, but I'm okay with that. It's where I'm going with this is, Plato's aeon, this connection to the infinity of possibilities and ideas and all the desirable and possible worlds, the ability to create the sense in the Christian term that we are made in the image of God and we have creative power, is a godlike quality, but we are mortals. And so the exercise of meditation is not to destroy ego, but is to reconstitute ego, to, break it apart, connect with the beyond, and come back down and reincarnate, be reborn, and then be an agent of the Tao in the world, and recognize that you will always be an imperfect agent, that there will always be conflict, and this is where I'm going to get into heresies. It's like both sides in the Civil War were on God's side. Holy, I can't believe I said that. But quite, the Battle Hymn of the Republic is a great, example of the Union sense of like that they were on God's side, and you can't help but like read Abraham Lincoln and almost weep at the spiritual exercise of what he went through in standing for certain principles and a certain cause. But then also, if you read Robert E. Lee and what they were standing for something as well. And so, and as a matter of fact, one of the things they were standing for is federalism. And that is very active in our world right now in 2020 with coronavirus. It's like the idea that maybe the federal government shouldn't tell us whether we should close our state, our city, our town. So what I'm getting at is that there's this mysterious thing going on that is existence itself. And anyone who thinks that they have like fully bottled it up, fully understood it, is missing it. Yeah. And
back to the left brain, right brain thing, because that's the bottling it up is the left brain. And it's like, you got to bottle it up, but then you got to explode the bottle as well and realize that's not it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yep. So I've been doing a lot of painting. I'll show you some of my paintings. They're all on the internet though, if you want to see them. But I'll talk about this whole conversation in the context of some of my art. Here is Cain and Abel. Can you see it?
Yeah.
So Cain is jealous of Abel, so he kills Abel because his sacrifice was accepted, and Cain's was not. Because they had different value systems in a way. He valued his sacrifice, and there was a assumption that it's better. And in this story is contained kind of the whole insight of René Girard around mimetic theory, that sanity is a network effect and value systems are network effects. So, I desire a red Ferrari because you desire a red Ferrari, but if nobody desired a red Ferrari, maybe I wouldn't buy one. No. So all the herd thinking is here, and this is a sin because it is much better to have your own relationship with value, your own relationship with God,
Yeah.
and not necessarily to prefer someone else because they are rewarded. Here's another story. This is the Tower of Babel, and the line is, God confusing them with languages, and it's, behold, this is only the beginning of what they shall do. And there's this like conceit that if we only build this tower to the sky, if we only accelerate AI, then we'll finally like be as gods. This is literally our society. This is such a beautiful image of our society.
Yeah.
Here's this. This is Jacob wrestling with the angel. And the line is, I name you Israel, for you've wrestled with men and with angels, and you have overcome. And the idea is, and there's a great poem by Rilke, and I like the Robert Bly translation. It's A Man Watching. And I will read a few lines because it's like maybe my favorite.
Yeah, and after that, we should take that as our last 5 minutes or so.
Yep. What we choose to fight is so tiny. What fights with us is so great. When we win, it's with small things, and the triumph itself makes us small. What is extraordinary and eternal does not want to be bent by us.
Damn.
Winning does not tempt that man. This is how he grows, by being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. And so I'll wrap that up with sort of like a last thing where it's like, coronavirus, give me liberty or give me death. That, there's this utopian technocratic attempt that we see in everything from the AI fake news story to, our willingness to be locked up by technocrats with coronavirus. It's all kind of the same in my mind, where, we are trying to create utopia and perfect everything. And the conceit is that it is possible to create a perfect world. But the best world that we can hope for is not a world where there's guaranteed progress and nobody dies and everything is sort of safe, but one in which we are able to sort of continually strive, continually debate, continually be at risk, and continually express ourselves.
Damn, that's cool. So how can our listeners find out more about you?
I'm easy to contact. Francis at invisible.email, not .com, .email. Francis at invisible.email. You can also find me on Twitter. You can also find me on Facebook. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm really easy to reach.
Cool. Thank you, Francis. It's always a pleasure. Looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, Stewart.
Yeah.